Welcome back. Just before the break, in Tony Ng's report, we saw just how expensive Auckland housing has become. So, what are the options? How could you cool down the market? Our next two guests are in Dunedin, former Reserve Bank Governor Dr Don Brash and David Parker, Labour's finance spokesperson. Good morning to you both. Thank you for joining us this morning.
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 Good morning. If I can start with you, Dr Brash, what danger does a heated property market pose to our economy?
Well, first of all, let's agree that Auckland house prices, indeed New Zealand house prices more generally, are currently very expensive indeed, as your previous introduction showed. Outrageously high relative to incomes, very high indeed. Our median house prices in New Zealand are now higher, 50% higher, than median house prices are in the United States. And I think the Reserve Bank's worry is that if that continues to increase, if the house prices continue to increase, the risk is that the banking system may be destabilised when that bubble eventually bursts. In addition, of course, not only the banking system would be hurt, but a lot of buyers would be severely hurt too, including first home buyers jumping into this market. If there were to be a 5 or 10 or 15% reduction in price, their deposits would be wiped out.
OK, so explain to me then, Dr Brash, how the LVR would work and look to address that issue.
Well, let me first of all say that the LVR measure proposed by the Reserve Bank, as I understand it, is very much a second or third best option. The best solution to the problem is to release more land. Every objective observer recognises, including the Productivity Commission, which looked at this question for the government a couple of years back, says the basic problem in Auckland is the restriction on land supply. So the people are paying $400,000 for 500 square metres, which is an eighth of an acre in the old language, in Flatbush, which is, as you know, nowhere near the centre of Auckland. $400,000 for a bare section is quite outrageous for a country which has so much spare land. So that's the basic problem, and the government, I think, has finally recognised that and intends to do something about it. But failing that, the Reserve Bank has to say, well, how do we in the meantime deal with this question? Now, they've got two main options. They can increase interest rates, and that, of course, has the disadvantage of putting pressure on the exchange rate and therefore on exporters. And exporters should be cheering the fact they're looking at a second alternative, namely finding some direct way of restraining the amount of money which banks are lending on residential property. Now, is the LVR restriction the best way of doing it? I'm not sure, but it's one effective way of restraining the demand for houses.
David Parker, what is Labour's position on the LVR?
Well, the Reserve Bank's in a corner. I do agree with that, with Don Brash, that house prices are ridiculously overpriced, particularly in Auckland. That's an outcome of completely inept management by National over the last 5 years, who have refused to address this issue in other ways. Land supply, as Don Brash says, is part of the answer. It's only part of it, and I think that Don overstates how big a part it is of it. Even there, the National Party, until now, have blocked the Auckland District Council plan to open up more land and, perhaps more importantly, make intensification of land use within the existing urban limits easier. But our position is that Kiwis are losing the opportunity to own their own houses, in large part because the government prefers the interests of wealthy people who own lots of houses, who have tax-free speculation capital gains that they don't pay tax on, driving prices ever higher, on top of income tax cuts, 40% of which went to the top 10%. So this is caused by the government, and the Reserve Bank's in a corner. So
you don't support the LVR, but you would perhaps introduce the tool of capital gains tax to counter this?
No, that's not quite our position. What we say is that the Reserve Bank's been handed a loaded gun by the government, who pretend they don't want it to apply to first home buyers, but always knew it would. Under Labour, we would have a capital gains tax. We would be addressing the supply of houses by building some affordable houses, which is another important part of the mix. You have to deal with supply as well as demand. And if we did those things, then LVRs would not have to be applied to first home buyers. Unfortunately, it's got so bad now
Dr Brash.
that they have to.
But you know that Australia, of course, has a capital gains tax of the kind that Labour's proposing, and Australia also has exactly the same problem that we have. Seriously unaffordable housing caused by the same factors, namely a strangling of land supply. Yes, you're quite right, land supply is only one issue, but the Productivity Commission said there were 3 or 4 issues, of which land supply was the main one. and I think there can be no doubt about that.
Well,
the Auckland Council's proposal of intensification...
There can be neither can there be there's absolutely no doubt that allowing people to own multiple houses and makes tax-free capital gains when if they invested their money somewhere else in the economy they would be paying tax is one of the reasons why house prices are as high as they are. Indeed, some of the bank economists are saying that quite publicly.
But David, whatever the merits of a capital gains tax, and I don't want to get into that, we know that Australia has the kind of capital gains tax that you are proposing. It has made no effective difference at all.
It's not the complete answer, but it's an... No, that's not right. It is an important part of the answer. You cannot deny that allowing multiple ownership of land with people who make a tax-free gain is one of the things that inflates the rate of return that they get from speculation in housing. But, there's multiple things that the government have not done here. They haven't built any affordable houses. They haven't done anything to address the supply of land. And Don Brash is right on that until now.
OK, and David Parker, you have said...
the Auckland Council implement their plan.
Excuse me a moment, David Parker, you have said, though, Labor will build houses, some 90,000 houses? Is that your plan?
100,000 houses over 10 years. The houses that are being built in Auckland are largely very big, expensive houses, and there's a need to change that product mix. The government won't build them, but it will fund them and then on-sell them to New Zealanders.
Of course they're expensive houses, because if you pay $400,000 for a best section, you're not going to put a $100,000 house on it. You're going to put a $400,000 or a $500,000 house on it, and you end up with $1 million property. I mean, that's the basic problem. The basic raw land for 1/8 of an acre, spending $400,000 to $500,000 for bare land is outrageous. And that's caused by the Auckland Council strangling land supply.
Mr Parker, we've done a little bit of research here and we looked back, forgive me for butting in. In the 1950s, the average New Zealand house was equivalent to 4 years' annual salary. So if that same equation applied now, then, to 4 years of the average New Zealander's salary, the average home would cost $160,000. That's never going to work, is it? Labor can't surely build its way out of this problem.
Well, unless you... No, we can't get to a $100,000 or $180,000 house, and we're not pretending to. But you heard your own clip there that played before we came on air. People are paying $500,000 for houses that are not worth $500,000. A first home ought to be accessible.
Because they're paying for the land.
Land of opportunity.
Because they're paying for the land.
No, it's not just land, Don. It is not just land. There is a tax bias. There's the fact that the houses that are being offered by builders are all big houses. There are a number of things that need to be addressed.
Okay.
What it proves is with some of the highest house prices in the world, the government's failed.
Dr Brash, we understand from some of the real estate agents that we have spoken to that Chinese banks will now lend money, pretty extraordinary, they will now lend money on New Zealand real estate at a lower interest rate than what our banks here will offer. So what situation could that potentially create?
Well, certainly it means that buyers can access money more cheaply than they can, let's say, from a New Zealand finance company, which may be the alternative for a first home buyer. I wasn't aware of the fact that that was taking place. If Chinese banks are making those loans, they're presumably taking a currency risk on the New Zealand dollar, or perhaps the buyer is taking a currency risk on the New Zealand buyer. It isn't, I suspect, a riskless activity for either the bank or the home buyer. OK,
David Parker, what would Labor do about foreign ownership? What would Labor do about foreign ownership? Would you go as far as the Greens?
We've already said that we would ban the foreign ownership of rural land. We're worried about the effect. This is another thing that's pushing up prices. Overseas buyers of New Zealand land
are driving up the price. That won't make homes affordable, though, for first-time buyers, will it?
Well, all of the... Look, if you take out speculation pressure, overseas buyers pushing up prices, you build some more houses, you release some more land for development, and you enable the intensification of land within the boundary, all of those things combine to doing something that the government has failed abjectly to do.
Would you consider restricting foreign ownership of residential land?
Yes, we'd consider that.
To what degree?
Well, I'm not going to announce that, but we're worried about these issues. We think that the suite of solutions that we have, which deal with both demand pressures and increased supply, both important parts of the equation.
OK, but how would you look to restrict that foreign ownership of residential property? Give me some ideas here, what you would maybe look to do.
There are overseas examples. I'm actually not going to announce them today, but the Greens have come up with one idea, which is to introduce stamp duty on foreign purchases to make it a bit harder for them to advantage a New Zealander. There are other options around, but I'm not going to go into that further today.
Don Brash, you're a former leader of the National Party. Nationals always believed that New Zealand is a property-owning democracy. Does this country have to accept that that dream now is over?
No, it is not. I think the key issue remains land supply. Roughly 0.7% of New Zealand land is currently urbanised. We have a huge abundance of land. And no, we don't want to sort of asphalt over good horticultural land, but as you will know, Rachel, in Auckland, the North Shore is basically clay for as far ahead as one can drive. You could put suburbs across the North Shore of Auckland and not lose any agricultural or horticultural production.
I was at the same talk as you were a couple of weeks ago, Don, where Harvard Professor Glaser was saying that the more important things is rules that enable development within the boundary. He's not saying that you shouldn't expand the boundary, and neither is the Auckland Council, but actually enabling more intensive development within the boundary is probably more important. But you've got to do all these things. It's no one solution.
David Parker, this is such an issue right now. Labor gets it right. Labor gets its policy right on housing. You could win an election on it. It's such a hot topic at the moment. You're looking at a capital gains tax. You'll say you'll build 100,000 homes. What about the restrictions on foreign ownership? Is that the clincher that could win you an election, do you think?
Time will tell, Rachel.
When will we know?
You know, this is a very... the Labour Party stands for the opportunity of ordinary New Zealanders, everyday New Zealanders, to participate in life, to have, to have the rewards of working hard. If you save, you should be able to buy a house, and locking out first home buyers while you're protecting the interests of overseas buyers and speculators is absolutely irresponsible on the part of this government.
All right, David Parker, Dr. Don Brash, thank you both for your time this morning.